Before we uncover the dark secrets and hidden motives behind the greatest achievement in human history, make sure to smash that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss a mind-bending uncovering like this. What if I told you that the moon landing was about far more than science or national pride? What if the true story of Apollo was written not just in the dust of the Sea of Tranquility, but in the shadows of espionage, propaganda, and raw geopolitical power? Think about it. Why did the US risk lives, fortunes, and its very reputation to plant a flag where no human had ever stood? And what did they keep hidden from us all? Keep watching, because by the end of this video, you'll never look at that grainy moon footage the same way again. Let's rewind the tape, not to July 1969, but to the earliest days of the Cold War, when the idea of sending a man to the moon sounded like wild fiction. It was a time when two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, stood on opposite sides of the world, both poised to destroy each other with nuclear weapons at a moment's notice. In this world, everything was a competition. Spies, sports, ideals, and especially technology. In October 1957, the Soviet Union shocked the planet by launching Sputnik, the world's first artificial satellite. Overnight, Americans looked up and saw, floating over their heads, a symbol of communist engineering that few thought possible. It made the US look slow, weak, and behind. Politicians panicked. Ordinary people worried that the Soviets would soon dominate the skies, and maybe someday drop bombs from orbit. The space race began not as a journey for knowledge, but as a battle for global, psychological dominance. Now here's what you weren't told in your school textbooks. The true fuel of the Apollo program wasn't just rocket propellant, but fear. The fear that if America fell behind, it might lose everything. President Eisenhower was cautious, but after Sputnik, a fever gripped Washington that would define a generation. For the Soviets, space was the ultimate propaganda weapon. Yuri Gagarin became the first man in space in 1961. And for the second time, in less than 5 years, the US was staring up at a communist victory ribbon tied around the planet. The American government knew it needed a bold, audacious response, something so huge it would dwarf anything Moscow could imagine. So John F. Kennedy stood before Congress in May 1961 and declared something that even his closest advisors thought was close to impossible. Send a man to the moon and return him safely before the decade was out. This wasn't just a challenge to engineers. It was a gauntlet thrown at the feet of communism itself. The message was clear. America wouldn't just catch up. It would leap ahead, if only on TV screens and global front pages. But here's the real twist. The moon landing's primary purpose was never about lunar science, or exploring the unknown, or even the noble search for truth. It was about winning hearts and minds, not just in America, but in every nation across the developing world, from Africa to South America to Asia, where millions of people watched and listened to see which system could rise high. To make this happen, the US government emptied its pockets. NASA's budget soared to a peak of almost 5% of all federal spending. To put that in context, if that same slice of the pie was spent today, NASA would have a budget of over $250 billion. That's more than the annual budget of most nations. Entire industries, cities, and educational systems were rewired for one blazing objective: beat the Soviets to the moon, no matter the cost. Yes, the moon landing was about American innovation, about stretching the limits of what humanity could do. But the secret behind Apollo's vast resources and the unwavering political will was how tightly it was woven into intelligence, military strategy, and global perception management. This is the story you never heard. While everyday citizens watched astronauts train in simulated lunar modules, behind the curtain, some of the biggest minds in American military intelligence were working side by side with NASA. The reason? Whoever controlled the moon, or could even claim symbolic control, would seem to control the future. At the time, both the US and the USSR had real plans for putting military surveillance equipment in space. There were covert discussions about using the moon as a base for reconnaissance, or even as a missile platform. While these ideas never became practical, Just the hint of them was used to stoke public and congressional funding and propaganda. The Apollo program became the ultimate showcase. Carefully managed press briefings told the world a story of American unity, courage, and know-how. The astronauts were more than pilots. They were mythical heroes, selected as much for their all-American looks and clean-cut families as for their skills. Television cameras followed every step, every handshake, every tense launch moment. But much was left unsaid. The U.S. government and NASA went to extraordinary lengths to project an image of perfection. Mission failures weren't just setbacks. They were state secrets, managed, spun, or buried when possible. The early disasters, like the Apollo 1 fire that killed 3 astronauts, were quickly overshadowed by visions of triumph to keep the world's attention fixed on success, not loss. And for those who question just how important propaganda was, here's something fascinating. The Apollo 11 landing was broadcast in 33 countries. In total, over 600 million people watched live. Billions saw grainy pictures of Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin on the lunar surface. For many, especially in the Third World, that both Washington and Moscow desperately wanted to sway, the symbolism was clear. America could do what no other nation could even imagine. Political leaders knew it, and they milked every second for inspiration and intimidation. But let's go even deeper. Why did U.S. leaders care so much what Africans, Asians, and Latin Americans thought? Because the Cold War wasn't just about the U.S. and the USR. It was about every country in between, every potential ally or satellite. The moon landing became a soft power juggernaut, a way to convince the world that democracy, capitalism, and American know-how could achieve literal miracles. Yet the Apollo myth sometimes hides less inspiring truths. Enormous amounts of money were funneled to contractors who padded budgets, delivered late, or produced technology for military, not just civilian, goals. Developments from Apollo wound up in missile systems and intelligence satellites. The divide between exploration and domination was never as clear as it looked on primetime TV. Back home, the moon landing wasn't universally loved. Many Americans, especially in poor communities or among the anti-war movement, wondered why the U.S. spent billions to reach the moon while millions went hungry in American cities. In fact, protesters from the Poor People's Campaign staged demonstrations at Cape Kennedy. NASA was forced to listen, a reminder that the drive to space masked tremendous divides and pain on the ground. And what about the real dangers the government rarely admitted? The astronauts, those smiling faces on magazine covers, were risking far more than most knew. The technology was untested on this scale. The backup plan, if Armstrong and Aldrin died on the surface, was already drafted. A speech for a president to read, and systems to cut off live TV in case something went horribly wrong. Propaganda about the peaceful nature of the moonshot often glossed over how much of Apollo's technology was adapted straight from military missiles, particularly the Saturn V rocket, whose main engineers were Germans like Werner von Braun, himself a former Nazi and engineer for Hitler's. The decision to bring men like von Braun to the U.S. was itself a secret, only gradually acknowledged as the Cold War wounds faded, and the need for rocket expertise eclipsed the moral compromises it involved. This is also a part of the story you never saw in glossy NASA documentaries. Operation Paperclip, as it was called, brought over scores of scientists with Nazi pasts, not just for American rocketry, but to make sure the Soviets didn't get them first. For years, these connections were airbrushed or omitted from public view in service of one priority: win the space race by any means necessary. When the Eagle finally landed on the moon on July 20th, 1969, it wasn't just a triumph for the engineers, astronauts, and dreamers. It was an exclamation point in a secret war for global influence. Nixon's administration staged calls to the astronauts, choreographed flag plantings, and made sure the world saw, with specially prepped transmissions and teams of propagandists, what American achievement looked like. But the science wasn't all show. Lunar experiments, rock samples, seismic sensors, they were real and provided crucial data. Yet knowledge wasn't always the real prize. Behind the scenes, the White House and Pentagon were tracking not just Soviet rocket launches, but their own audience numbers, trying to ensure American dreams triumphed not only on the moon, but on the television sets of Moscow, Bombay, Lagos, and São Paulo. One of the most closely guarded secrets was just how razor-thin the line between success and disaster was. The Saturn V rocket was the most powerful machine ever built, but it was also temperamental. Many unmanned tests ended in fiery explosions. On the lunar module, one single switch in the wrong position could have stranded 2 men forever on the moon. Even after landing, there were moments when Armstrong and Aldrin had to troubleshoot alarms, mysterious error codes, and near-catastrophic amounts of fuel left in their lunar lander. To this day, you don't often hear about the near misses, the times when disaster came within seconds, or when complex systems barely did their jobs. NASA was excellent at managing the message, keeping the heroic narrative front and center, while working behind curtains of secrecy and public relations. Apollo's legacy didn't end with television glory. After 1972, the program was suddenly canceled. Why? In part, because the US had already achieved the main unspoken objective, winning the space race for global credibility. With national priorities shifting, funding cratered, there was less hunger from policymakers to keep risking billions in American lives for lunar adventures. The flag was planted. The world had seen American power and technology at its most dazzling, but the impact reverberated for decades. Space technology, developed in a crucible of Cold War urgency, spread outward. GPS, telecommunications, meteorology, missile systems. The benefits of Apollo weren't just scientific, but military, social, and commercial, reshaping everything from global surveillance to how we call each other on cell phones today. Meanwhile, the Soviets pressed forward with their own lunar plans, but ultimately failed to mount a crewed landing. That symbolic loss arguably contributed to a crucial perception that the US was technologically unstoppable, a narrative that bolstered American diplomacy and economic policy for years to come. Yet, the honest truth, rarely uttered in the swirl of red, white, and blue streamers, is that the moon landing was just as much about perception as about planetary exploration. The astronauts themselves became living symbols, packaged and promoted to inspire and distract, depending on the political winds at home and abroad. And what did they keep from us, really? Not alien secrets or conspiracies, but the full reckoning with just how much of Apollo was politics with a cosmic backdrop. The silent hidden arms race to build rockets bigger and faster, the propaganda campaigns that cloaked espionage and military intentions in the garb of pure science, and the sometimes dark compromises forced by the logic of existential superpower conflict. So next time you see Armstrong's famous "One small step for man," remember, it was in one sense the culmination of centuries of human curiosity, and in another, a masterstroke of statecraft and psychological warfare, beamed into living rooms worldwide. Now let me throw a question back at you. If we face new rivalries in space today, new flags racing toward Mars, or the lunar South Pole, are we watching a new Apollo, or repeating some very old games? Thanks for watching. If you found these hidden truths about the moon landing as eye-opening as I promised, don't forget to like, subscribe, and sound off in the comments below with your thoughts. Should we see the Apollo era primarily as a technological miracle, or as a real-life chess move in a secret war for world power? And what will the next secret space race look like? Stay curious, stay skeptical, and keep looking up.